Enough. I have endured more than enough.
The story of Midra is a story of suffering, of fear, of sorrow. And yet, despite it all, on a closer look, this tale rises above its tragedy, right from Midra's history to his persecution, and ultimately to his death. There is beauty in the legacy of Midra, and this video hopes to do the man justice, lest he be forgotten, or worse, misunderstood over time. In an unremarkable room within the Shadow Keep is hidden an illusory wall, beyond which is a coffin that leads down the waterfall to the valley beneath the fortress, a valley which winds around and down to the Drangleic catacombs, that in turn extend deep within the ground to open into the aptly named Abyssal Woods. Finally, Midra's manse stands at a distant corner of the haunting forest. This boss is universally loved, and rightly so, but Midra and his region were once very different, so to understand the depths of his lore, let us go to the beginning. This woodland was once a holy and bountiful place, and Midra served as a respected member of society. He was termed a sage, wise and of sound judgment. This painting within the manse illustrates the stark contrast to the area in the present day. Colourful, overflowing with life, and bright with sunlight. Furthermore, Midra was a sanctioned minister for the Hornsent civilization. Manse is traditionally defined as a house provided for a minister of certain Christian churches, especially the Scottish Presbyterian Church. So Midra's placement here was part of the religion of the age, which is further illustrated by the church located on the opposite side of the forest, and that the area was known as the Sanctum of Sage Midra, that is to say a sacred and/or private place from which most are excluded, and here it was likely both. Midra was an academic and a philosopher. The majority of his manse constitutes an extensive collection of books and a large library with tall ceilings. This is specifically called Midra's library by this site of grace, which shows its construction and use was for him. He even invested into mechanisms to move the bookshelves themselves, presumably for organisation or space management, and illustrates how this was not a place of simple storage, but of active research. The discussion chamber, also named by the site of grace within, shows he invited fellows to share their knowledge and to work together, and the number of scholarly shadow undead that remain even today attests to the influence and respect Midra commanded. What Midra studied is up for debate, but given what followed, we are inclined to believe his research was kind in nature, and centered on those who suffered, and how their lives could be improved. This period of earnest learning as an upstanding citizen was lengthy, and extended into Midra's elderly years. There are a number of possible interpretations for how the next sequence of events transpired, but our opinion taking everything into account is as follows. A young lady of unknown origins, for whom Midra was many years her senior, arrived and seduced the scholar. She was called Nanaya, and thus she became the lady of the manse. They were close, and in time she became pregnant, a subtle detail illustrated in a painting of the two of them. But there was something wrong with their child. Perhaps it was simply unhealthy, or even stillborn, or something altogether more sinister, since this was in all likelihood no accident. Nonetheless, the child died when it was still small, and that was only the beginning. Soon, winged insects carrying a dangling frenzied flame grape arrived at the woods, the winter lantern flies. On seeing these, the wise know to stay well clear of that place, and yet Midra did not leave, which suggests one of two possibilities. He was somehow involved or responsible for the influx of frenzy into the region, or, as we believe, his research up to this point was such that he sought to help with his wisdom rather than run away, to learn why this was happening and why now, rather than forget the region entirely. The flame of frenzy was already an established phenomenon, since it was known that these lazy flies were heralds of the aging untouchables. There had even been those who had previously made use of frenzy within their society, until the Hornsent forbid the flame's use. So the question once again is, what role did Midra play in the growing infection of the woods? At first, we thought the aging untouchables indicate that Midra was the one who brought the frenzy. These haunting creatures are not just a byproduct of frenzy, such as the rats or goats who have been afflicted through proximity. They are conscious, active agents seeking to spread the madness. The goats, for example, passively exude frenzy on bleating, regardless of whether they have noticed the tarnished. The aging untouchables, however, do not passively exude madness. Only upon noticing you do they actively send out frenzy. The description of the aged one's exaltation talisman says, "Gift your madness to our Lord. Bless our brethren with grapes. Take care that they fully ripen." So they are not just inflicting madness, but taking care to create fitting, ripened grapes for their Lord, presumably Midra. And if so, and Midra sanctioned these creatures, what if he did more than that? What if he created them? In front of the manse are lined 10 headless corpses. They're completely unique assets that are heavily emphasized by the environmental design, so they must be important. And we wondered if they might be related to the creation of the aging untouchables. Being headless has strong associations with frenzy after all. However, the numbers don't currently match. There are 10 bodies outside the mansion, and there are a total of 6 aging untouchables wandering within the forest. If we add the 3 swollen grapes found within the manse, which the untouchables all drop on death, there is still 1 left to account for all 10 bodies. So it is unclear if these bodies have a connection to the aging untouchables. But either way, Midra does not appear to be responsible, and this pattern, that Midra might seem complicit before a closer look reveals him to be innocent of the frenzied developments, repeats again and again. For example, let's look at the torn diary page, which reads, "A discarded page ripped from a diary, bearing a passage written in a tremulous hand. I touched him, but only once. When he thrust his staff in my face, I brushed it aside. It was then that I touched him, the aging untouchable." This is a hint at how you can actually kill the untouchables. If you parry them, they lose their ethereal nature and can be attacked. The parry timing is earlier than you might expect, so be careful. Perhaps this item is only that, a game design tool, but it could be theorized that this was Midra himself, which would explain how he got afflicted with frenzy. By touching one of these creatures directly, perhaps it served as a medium for the touch of the 3 fingers themselves. After all, the swollen grapes of the aging untouchables are marked with fingerprint burns and serve as proof of having been touched directly by the 3 fingers' embrace. However, upon further scrutiny, this too proves not to be the case. Midra was a scholar, an academic. He was practiced in making accountable, clear notes and writing papers from a lifetime of research. Even if the manse had already fallen and he had little time, Midra would not have written such an important revelation as to the nature of these otherwise otherworldly creatures in his diary. It would have been placed somewhere important, and he would have written in a more clear, succinct manner to better share the information. Thus, once again, Midra was not the one to touch the aging untouchable. Similarly, Midra and his associates would have been familiar with the Flame of Frenzy, and how the Hornsent forbade its use, and yet they did not abandon him. In fact, Midra retained the same respect and honour as ever, as shown by the spirit's final words in the present day. One says, "Heed the words of our great master Midra," while the other goes even further, and illustrates how in their eyes Midra is unfairly punished. I ask, what crime did great Midra commit? This is not a case of their opinions simply aligning with their leader to excuse an extreme belief, for a crime is not a subjective thing to contend with. Instead, they ask what specific rule in their society could be referenced that Midra has broken. Thus, it could not be that Midra invoked the Flame of Frenzy, since had he done that, this academic could not debate the allegation. Midra did not invite the Winter Lantern Flies, or the Aging Untouchables, or anything else. And so, the question then is, why him? Why did the frenzy infect his realm specifically? Word spread fast about the frenzy in the forest. The region literally began to sink, it seems, since the painting clearly shows it was once a bright, sunlit place, where now it is untouched even by sunlight. It's a common thought going through the abyssal woods that the region is very empty. There are few items, few enemies, and even the frenzied water and rocks feel inert. But this is the nature of frenzy. It is chaos in that it removes the nature of everything until there is no division, no features, no life. The state of the forest is a brilliant illustration of a partway descent into a world of frenzy. The Hornsent, however, recognized the devastation of the flame of frenzy through the lens of spirits. The culture of the Hornsent held at its center a deep veneration of spirits, through which they attained not just power, but understanding. Indeed, it was through spirits that the Hornsent were able to glean insights from the wise but long forgotten ancient civilization of Rao. The Antiquity Scholar's Cookbook says, a record of crafting techniques left by Hornsent academics who studied the ancient ruins of Rao details techniques for working with sprites thought lost to antiquity. Spirits were the means by which the past could be unearthed. They held the secrets that otherwise could not be found. In fact, it was likely through the Rao culture that the Hornsent learnt the value of spirits, for they too clearly venerated them. The Rao burrow, used to craft sprite stones, is an oval-shaped stone bearing an engraving, a relic found at the ancient ruins of Rao. In the centre of the stone is a small, nest-like hole. Once this is inhabited by a sprite, the stone can be used as a ritual implement. Then there is the spirit calculus, a sign of particular spiritual potency, which is found by hunting horned beasts in the ancient ruins of Rao. Frenzy, however, removes everything, illustrated by the description for surging frenzied flame. A spirit grave stone burned with frenzied flame. Spirits are eternal, and yet frenzied flame melts them away regardless. Spirits, the one thing that truly endures, that serves as the legacy for all ages, all history, all life. Even they are melted away in the flame of frenzy, an absolute and irreversible breakdown of all things. And this is why Torrent acts in a totally new manner in the abyssal woods. Torrent the spectral steed isn't scared of rot, of Radan, of the lands between, or even, now, the Elden Beast. Though Torrent can be damaged and require healing, he cannot truly be eliminated. But Frenzy has the power to melt Torrent away. The spectral steed is frightened and cannot be summoned. It is curious that Torrent is not scared of other instances of frenzy, such as frenzied enemies, or even the frenzy sun in Liurnia, and perhaps that is simply a design issue. Or this could indicate the difference between simply the phenomenon of madness and frenzy dwelling in the eyes of those who have reached their limit, and the absolute power of a lord of frenzied flame, through whom the plea,
"May chaos take the world!"
can actually be realized. And this quality of a Lord of Frenzy is something that will be important later. The Hornsent refused to risk their civilization. No wonder the Hornsent forbid the flame's use. The region was labelled forbidden by the Hornsent. The church was abandoned, and ruthless inquisitors were sent to purge the land. These inquisitors were members of the upper echelons of society. Their heads are covered in horns, and many have resided in Anir Elim to the present day. They were infamous for their use of barbs, a known symbol of coercive questioning. Their various tools are designed to inflict severe pain without being lethal. The barbed staff spear is a great staff of Jori, Elder Inquisitor, who guards access to the region. The tip bristles with golden barbs, symbolic of the Inquisition's torture, allowing one to wield the staff as a great spear. That's to say, being able to wield the staff as a spear is a secondary use, the first being that of torture. Midra knew that the Inquisitors were coming, shown by the state of the manse. If the destruction was only that of the Inquisitors, then the books would not be rifled through, they would simply burn the library as a whole. Similarly, if Midra was responsible for all the damage and burnt the library in his madness, then the remnants would bear the mark of frenzy. Once again, there is no evidence of Midra's frenzy here. Instead, the state of the library shows his desperation going through it. Perhaps this was seeking to somehow ameliorate the frenzied state of the forest before he was detained. Perhaps it was related to his and Nanaya's child. It was clearly a rushed affair of the utmost importance given how much of the library has been upturned. But it was not to try to escape. Neither he nor his fellows ran, and again attesting to Midra's innocence, nor did they fight. The Inquisitors are fierce to be sure, but they are not warriors. Their tools are primarily that of torture, not combat, and in the present day there are only a couple horned warrior summons patrolling the halls. There is no evidence of a struggle. Even those who were executed through decapitation in front of the manse seem like they accepted their fate. A cruel fate where the Inquisitors impaled a barbed spike into the stumps of their headless necks. Midra, even in the present day, does not resist the Inquisitors, some of whom reside just around the corner from him. Instead, Midra accepted his punishment, despite their ignorance and stubborn fear. On Midra, the Inquisitors used a unique tool, now a greatsword that was used in the execution of a damnation like no other. The barbs that pierce the victim from within wind gently around the blade. Damnation. That's to say condemnation to eternal punishment in hell. To this end, the Inquisitors carried out, or at the very least allowed, the stitching of Midra's wounds. They sought Midra's eternal suffering, but not his death. The rest were given no mercy either, an image painted well by the madding hand, a glove stitched together from the flayed skin of the victims of a butcherous bloodbath, forged of an unyielding, black impulse towards revenge, fostered in those who were hunted down as heretics by their own brethren. These are the weapons of the utterly downtrodden. Their own kind. Midra and his fellows had been valued members of this Hornsent society for so many years, but it made no difference. I beg you, stop. Haven't I taken enough? Are we not brethren, common in our line? And yet, you offer only cruelty. These spirits even have horns sprouting from their heads to further confirm their Hornsent kinship. On top of it all, the Inquisitors set the incredible collection of knowledge within the manse ablaze, presumably with their barbed candlesticks. From all this brutality and merciless torture, the Inquisitors showed that the Hornsent fundamentally misunderstood the phenomenon of frenzy, madness, and most of all, the qualities that make a lord of frenzied flame. Madness is the state one is driven to once all other options seem fruitless, the wish to remove one's state of being entirely, and the sweet release of nothingness over an endless state of hopeless suffering. The flame of frenzy burns the eyes, but tranquility follows in its wake. May this pot bring salvation to those it strikes. This is why it is called madness, for only madness could conclude such a thing. The madding hand illustrates how the brutality gave rise to more frenzied creations, not less. The vengeance fostered in these victims generated the opposite of what the Hornsent sought, and their torture served only to reinforce their absolute despair. Finally, beheading some of the residents as a message shows the Hornsent were even ignorant of the connection between frenzy and headlessness. There is nuance within the madness of frenzy though. Some it is forced upon, where certain sights alone are enough to drive one mad. The aging untouchables certainly don't give their victims a choice. For others, it is a last resort, after everything they've believed and clung on to has failed them. The capital soldiers in Mount Gelmir, for example. In others, it can stem from a sense of revenge and righteous belief that their suffering is unwarranted, that the order itself is too flawed for repair, such as the nomadic merchants or the user of the madding hand. All of them harbour frenzy within, But there is a difference between these and the Lord of Frenzied Flame, and touching the three fingers is surely not the reason, else the three fingers would have simply embraced one of the nomadic merchants, or the aging untouchables would qualify. The Lord of Frenzied Flame shall take their torment, despair, their affliction, every sin, every curse, all melted away. This is what is required of the Lord. It requires strength, not just in raw power to overthrow the current order, but in belief. The Lord requires a sense of righteousness, or rather selfishness, to make the decision for all life and beyond that the suffering of the world means it would be better to remove the state of being entirely, to choose no existence over any present one. And though other orders also require this quality of a lord, to choose on behalf of their people, Frenzy is absolute and irreversible. Even Marika's order can be changed, but not so with Frenzy. And those who would advocate Frenzy know the madness of what they preach. This is why they ignore the big picture, and instead pitch only part of the full story. Whether it's Shabriri pleading about the life of a maiden, instead of looking at the lives of all things including that maiden, or in the description of the Lord of Frenzied Flame, who will not just take away their torment, despair and so on, but also their passion, their memories, their love, dreams, and everything else. That is the nature of frenzied madness. One is unable to see the beauty of life, and all that seems to remain is the suffering right in front of them.
It is chaos, devouring life and thought unending. However ruined this world has become, however mired in torment and despair, life endures. Births continue. There is beauty in that, is there not?
Midra knew this, through losing their child, through the frenzied infection of his realm, and through all the suffering inflicted on him and his fellows by the Inquisitors. He held on. He was a kind man, such that no matter what he went through, he could not justify embracing the end of all things simply for the sake of his suffering. Midra, like others before him, was too weak to become a lord. However, the desired strength for such a lord is the strength to enforce the end of all things. In many ways, the easy way out, the reset button. Perhaps this is weakness for those who believe in the frenzied flame, but for any other belief, surely this is strength. Just like Vike in later years, who showed he was easily powerful enough to become Elden Lord, and surely Lord of Frenzied Flame too, but on truly understanding what that meant, he refused and locked himself away. A demonstration, we believe, of strength, not weakness. But let's return to this question. Why Midra? If he wasn't the one to summon the Flame of Frenzy, and remained upstanding throughout everything that followed, why was he chosen to become Lord? Ironically, we think it was his kindness and his research that made him a prime candidate, just like Vike, who was tempted to frenzy through his wish to spare his maiden over anything else. Kindness. Midra just needed to be pushed to his absolute limit. And in all likelihood, everything that drove Midra to this limit stemmed from the one clear outlier within the manse, Nanaya. As the golden barbs inflicted eternal agony upon him, Midra held fast to Nanaya's entreaty. Endure. The word was a curse. Perhaps this can be interpreted as Nanaya knowing, like Midra, what would happen should he embrace the flame, and so she encourages him to resist that temptation, to endure so that frenzy would not be released on the world. However, is endure not a somewhat lackluster motivational speech? It feels almost detached. Surely she could have managed more than one word, if it was the last thing she could say to her spouse before his eternal torture. Not to mention, such an action can't really be called a curse. Midra's endless torture had begun, and then he was told to endure. It is not a curse, for there is no invocation, no knock-on result, just a lack of change. Instead, we believe this was a curse, for it ensured an inevitability. not just anyone can become Lord of Frenzy, because it needs someone entitled enough to wipe away the world itself. Midra, had he embraced the flame early on, would have been weak and broken by the flame. He would have ended up the same as any other frenzied person, lacking the strength to maintain their vision for the world. Midra had to suffer and reach a state of complete disillusionment.
I have endured more than enough.
Thus, this word endure was a curse because it forced Midra to suffer specifically to his complete breaking point, and then, by giving in, he would also be betraying the one he loved. What better way to force him to detach from the world itself and wipe it all away with the flame of frenzy than to set up this ultimatum? This is further illustrated by Nanaya's body, a unique asset found dead on a high level in the library that feels almost like it could have been Midra's office. We know this is Nanaya as it matches the painting of her with Midra, the same clothes and the same hair, for she does not have blonde hair in the painting. Instead, this is a flourish of the clothes she wears and can also be seen on her body. Instead, black hair can be made out on both the painting and her body. There is no evidence of her being killed, so she must have slowly died in isolation where the Inquisitors could not reach her. She doesn't seem to have been struggling to help Midra. She too did not fight back. Perhaps she did some research with the nearby books, but instead of showing worry for her husband or trying to reach him, she faded away, calmly cradling a very unique torch. A torch made by attaching a dying flame of frenzy to a small spinal column. In a distant land, in an age long past, was born a man who failed to become the Lord of Frenzied Flame. All that remains of him is cradled gently by Nanaya. A small spinal column, as in that of a child's. The child Nanaya and Midra expected in the painting. After all, children can be referred to as what remains of someone who has passed on. Midra's spine is fully intact, but the torch's ash of war is called Feeble Lord's Frenzied Flame. We know of no other with relation to Nanaya who failed to become the Lord. However, what is particularly important here is that the frenzy is not innate to the spinal column. Instead, the dying flame of frenzy was attached to it, and Nanaya gently cradles this torch, suggesting the frenzy is not off-putting. Perhaps even a comfort. All while Midra screamed in pain next door. Everything Nanaya has done has pushed Midra in the same direction, one that forced the Master of the Manse to madness. Their child, the word endure, her actions during his suffering, presumably attaching frenzy to the small spinal column, and the coincidental timing of frenzy spreading through the forest. Perhaps she was a maiden of the 3 fingers. On closer inspection, her eyes are in fact not covered like Hyeta's, but with only Hyeta to go off, we cannot know what qualities are required. Nanaya's remains are found on a balcony that cannot be accessed without pulling a lever to move this bookshelf. Then one can navigate the precarious path over to her, but this lever is only found behind the illusory wall with the painting of Midra with Nanaya. On finding this hidden path, it is easy to move straight through this initially unremarkable room on the way. However, it is this room that answers how the influence of the 3 fingers must have reached the manse, for these inconspicuous sheets cover not books or shelves, but fingers and stone eggs, just like those found in the finger ruins. Once again, if this was Midra's doing, surely his fellows would have known he had broken Hornsent rules. The fingers are actively covered and hidden in a secret room, so whoever did this knew of its blasphemy. The secret path from the room unlocks the route to Midra by revealing some stairs, but it also completes the odd path to Nanaya by allowing one to traverse across the moved bookshelf. Did Nanaya secretly bring the fingers and stone eggs when she first arrived? It would explain how frenzy was invoked so thoroughly within the realm, and may even hint at her origins. Perhaps she too arose somewhere near to the influence of the fingers. Between the hidden influence of Nanaya, the suffering at the hands of the Inquisitors, and perhaps in his own desperation in researching for solutions to everything that was happening, Midra does find the flame of frenzy well up inside him. Impaled with barbs, his eyes become filled with frenzy. His screams were imbued with frenzy. And yet, he endured. The man retained his sanity and autonomy. He withdrew to the deepest quarters of the manse to hide himself away from the world and limit the threat he posed. He laid down a mat, weighed down at each corner with 4 items that we presume to be some type of incense burners given how they are hung elsewhere in the manse. And to the present day, the man has meditated. He has sought to quell the frenzy within him despite it all. The region remained forbidden, and the path leading to it was guarded and hidden. Midra is the most hidden boss in the game because of the threat he poses to the world itself, despite all his efforts. Little do the Inquisitors know just how precarious their situation is by endlessly torturing the man. One day, a Tarnished happens upon an illusory wall. They charge through the ravine and the catacombs, killing any who tried to stop them. They do not falter at the abandoned woods. They are unaware of its history. And then they arrive at the manse. Midra immediately understands the situation and advises the Tarnished as best he can with his remaining energy.
Leave. Now. Come no closer. No closer, I say. The man's words.
The spirit repeats that we should listen to Midra's wisdom, but I must warn you, as you venture in, heed the words of our great master, Midra. Approach not the madness, lest ye succumb. Even in these warnings, his concern is for others. And yet, the Tarnished does not stop. They do not turn back even when there appears to be no path, and instead break through both illusory walls that hide the way through. It is certainly symbolic that it is the paintings within the manse that are illusory, for both are of distant history, long faded away. Midra's shrieks of pain are heard throughout the Tarnished's progression. Until, finally, Midra himself is found.
The depths of your foolishness!
Midra cannot believe this is happening. His frustration cannot be understated as he throws himself at you. His damage, and indeed his large health pool, neatly illustrate the man's strength. After all this, he can still take a real beating before he finally gives in. Before the Tarnished arrived, Midra was strong enough to resist, but more than that, there was an excruciating barrier that prevented him from taking the easy way out. He could always remove the barbs, but to make himself go through this is a strong deterrent, to say the least. And yet, the Tarnished, even more than the Inquisitors, makes even this option the less painful one. We also wonder if the gold barbs inadvertently served as a barrier to the influence of the outer god, a little like Miquella's golden needles. That could also be an extra reason for the barbs on the bodies outside the manse. And importantly, when Midra gives in, notice the change of tone in his voice.
No closer, I say. The man's words.
I have endured more than enough. I ask you forgive me, dearest Nanaya.
He does not go mad in the traditional sense. He goes mad in that he decides to do what surely only a madman could do, to become the Lord of Frenzied Flame. And yet, his voice is far more stable, certain, and even stoic than it was previously. The battle within is over, and he embraces, finally, as Nanaya had cursed him to do, the flame of frenzy, tearing off his own head. And tranquility follows in its wake. Midra's fight is brilliant. and perfectly illustrates the qualities of a Lord of Frenzied Flame, the glee in his attacks, the unhinged physicality, and of course the music. Did you notice the soundtrack features a brilliant addition of this leitmotif from the tune played by the nomadic merchants? The Ash of War of Midra's adapted weapon is called Golden Crux, which says there is something of the Golden Order in the sight of those fixed on the crux, a detail that illustrates the cyclic nature of persecution that stems from a fear of what is different and unknown, and maybe what the shared leitmotif is also hinting at. Once again, Midra's strength is clear. He has a larger health pool even than promised consort Radahn. And thematically fitting, it's his defences that are weak, and he's susceptible to bleed, frost, and holy. Midra embraced frenzy, but his chaos isn't erratic. He is sure and smooth in his movements, embracing the fight, and even sees no point in dodging. There are no hesitations or uncertainty over his beliefs anymore. He is the Lord of Frenzied Flame. But Midra, in all his wisdom, underestimated the strength others could also have. All this time, Midra had seen two options: eternal suffering, or being responsible for the melting of the world entire. And yet, there was a third option, an end to his suffering, as well as ensuring the world was safe from his frenzied flame. We, the Tarnished, managed to deliver to Midra an end to his eternal suffering, while keeping the world intact, by killing him once he becomes Lord. In the end, it was the right thing to charge into the manse and kill its master. Now, if Midra's spirit somehow remains, it can rest easy, knowing that he did his honor justice, and as a result, the beauty of the world remains. For now. If you made it this far, consider supporting the channel and get early access to upcoming releases, feature your own theories on the channel, or even get access to new Lore Before Bed videos ad-free for less than $1. Your support makes content like this possible, so thank you.